As Scott said, I have the pleasure of talking about variations in content across 3 different phases of the training year. And I guess it was about probably 6 months ago when we started talking about this. So I think there's some license in there to sort of expand outside a few areas. And what I'd like to look at first and foremost is a quote that a colleague of mine from the Queensland Reds in Australia once said about that really everything we do is obviously important, but unless you get the buy-in from the athletes and it's a positive environment that you help create, you won't basically get results. Even if it's the best program in the world, if you don't get those factors involved, it's not going to be successful. And secondly, I've made a career out of simplicity. And I think a lot of people over the years have tried to complicate what to me is a fairly simple and basic concept of improving athletic performance. And my dear friend Peter Harding once said that people complicate the profit. And I think that's pretty relevant going forward, particularly when you see the available technology and everything that's working through, that it's just important to look at what's really important and do what works. Just like to flick to this video, and this for people who are not familiar with rugby, will give you what rugby really is in 3 minutes. This was a game last year between the Chiefs and the Highlanders within the Super Rugby competition. And it was from the kickoff, and it's basically end-to-end high-intensity rugby. And for those of you unfamiliar with the sport of rugby, I think after seeing this, you'll see some of the reasons why we consider it to have such a very high aerobic base. People have misconstrued a lot about the game of rugby over the years in saying, because it's an intermittent high-intensity activity, that we should pull back on the aerobic conditioning elements. But when you look at this end-to-end, no-break rugby for around 3 minutes, you can see the actual physiological demands and why we need to build such a very, very strong base associated with high intensity, with explosive power, and basically all the biomotor qualities that you would care to list are involved in this particular activity between the eventual champions of the Super Rugby tournament, the Highlanders from Dunedin in New Zealand, and another highly placed team. A spattering of All Blacks crossed both teams, and we'll just let it play through for a wee bit. We might just give a little bit more volume there to get a little bit more excitement going on about the actual sport itself. When we look at the sport itself, from GPS coverage, we're looking at potentially, depending on positions, between 6 and 10 kilometres of overall running in the game. And speaking to my head of performance for Scottish Rugby yesterday, in the Japanese versus Scotland game in the recent tour of Japan by the Scottish national team, the one player was actually hitting over 12 kilometres for that actual game. So again, when you're looking at time on feet and the amount of volume of work that players have to do, and still look at explosive speed efforts, similar to what you've just seen in that particular try being scored at the end of 3 minutes of phase play back and forth, up and down across the field. So we're looking at a wide range of biomotor qualities, and to really have that aerobic base, we need to ask the players, particularly in their off-season program, to be involved in quite a lot of aerobic activities, so that when we move back into pre-season, which we've just started last week, as far as our pre-season for this coming year is concerned, it's important to establish that early. And particularly when we're working with players year in, year out over a long period of time, by probably more traditional methods than people would be using, by fartlek running and a lot of just time on feet, particular running. We can see the actual different aspects of the rugby profile there. But I'd like to sort of go across and to look at some thoughts about where I've come from and what I'm doing with my guys. So first and foremost, we all take preferential biases into the work that we do. And we really have to be concerned with what we're actually doing is making players better rugby players first and foremost. I know Joe Ken speaks extensively on we're not training people to be weightlifters or powerlifters. but we train people using those particular aspects to make them better at the sport they actually do. So I remember years ago, probably the first conference I attended, I discussed with Scott when that was, probably San Diego in about 1988 or 1890, something like that. And that there was a particular strength and conditioning coach from a major college, Division I NCAA school that had won national championships in basketball. And he was speaking about probably 5 or 6 different pressing movements in a particular workout for his college players. And I was very young, impressionable strength and conditioning coach back then, just working with professional basketball for the first time. And I was sort of amazed that they'd be doing decline bench press and incline bench press and dumbbells and flies and dips and the whole gamut of upper body pushing exercises. And then I saw him by the pool the next day, and he was just a sculpted mass of a life support system for a chest and deltoids. So it was basically his preferential biases. He could jump in at any time and get his workout. And now looking back with 30 years of hindsight, you can see that his preferential bias really dictated what he trained his athletes to do, and his athletes improved in spite of the program that he put in place rather than because of the program. Also, aspects of fitness testing. I'm not sure what you're all looking at, but in international sport, we have certain criterias from national governing bodies to allow our players to get to a certain level that have to be tested. And there are some programs that test primarily just to improve on those standards for the national governing body, rather than saying, well, we need to individualise this and try and get the areas of performance better for those people in those particular areas that we need to work on. But the bottom line is often stressed, irrespective if you make a team fitter, faster, or stronger, it's where you finish on the competition table which dictates whether you've got a job next year or next week or next month. So they are those sort of places that we need to look at. And I know Joe Ken just did a wonderful talk on congratulations, you've got the job, you're fired. So those areas are ones that, speaking to Joe Ken, would be exceptionally good for people to look at in longer terms. Now, to give you a season overview, you're used to different competitions. Working the Southern Hemisphere previously, we're only used to probably about 16 or 17 actual competition games. You see that in the Pro 12 competition, which I, with Edinburgh, works in, there are upwards of 33 games. And that takes into consideration competition itself. We have European competition. We also have test match players, which evolve for international duty. But there can be up to about 30-odd games that players will be prepared for. So it's a very, very long, brutal season as far as the competition is concerned. And we need to take into consideration rotation of players and also maintenance of all biomotor qualities when we're actually resting those players from a particular week of match training. National programs will dictate that players involved with national teams will rest upwards of about 5 games throughout the season. But when you're in a club situation, you need those international players to be successful in the competition you're preparing people for as well. So we've got 2 areas to look at and often competing for the same players over the course of the year. How I achieve that within the construct is regular one-on-one interviews. I think it's essential to allocate, for me it's every Monday morning for about 4 hours. It allows me to get through the entire roster of about 45 players over the course of probably a month. And we set our programs based around that particular one-on-one interviews. And it really comes down to who's the best player in your position? What makes that player the best player in their position? And what do we need to do with you to assist you in becoming the best player in your position? What's your limiting performance or limiting factors for your performance in achieving that? If you've already got a really, really developed aspect of strength, which we'll look at as we go through the presentation, but your cardiovascular fitness is low via, say, a yo-yo test or what's called a Bronco or a Mo Farah, which is a shuttle run test, we need to then obviously allocate time to develop that strength within your program rather than working always on constantly in strengths. And then how do we break that program into your week plans? I like a sort of a university-style system where you've got the lecture, which is the rugby-specific content, and then the tutorials become what you need to do to become better at your game. whether it's extra strength session, whether it's an extra speed session, whether it's more cardiovascular training, and basically it'll be dictated by these particular interviews. Particularly buying in with the individual athlete itself. Particularly some of our players have got upwards of 14, 15 years of experience in the game. Come from different programs, add different values, and we can actually use those ideas to actually improve the overall performance. I really like this in line with that. It was designed from an education perspective, but if we address everyone with exactly the same program, and the holy grail, I think, of team sports in particular, is the individualization of team training in that overall team sense, is to break down and bring those people out. If we judge everyone like fish, they won't be able to climb a tree. Conversely, if we set it up that everyone has to swim, and they're monkeys, they won't be able to swim very much as well. So we need to sort of pull out the key factors which involved in making each person better. So the process is basically treat each individual, each player like the individual they are. So to prioritize, to optimize. Training age will dictate the degrees of freedom that we give individual players. And we'll discuss that in the next slide. In that we're looking at a quadrant management system used from business, but I think very applicable when you're actually working with individuals in team sports. Exercise selection charts and working through with the players what exercises work best for them in the weight room. What have they done in different programs that allow them to be as strong or as powerful as they possibly can be? And then looking at the actual overall program and saying, well, how does it fit in the greater scheme of things? Then looking at loading methods and cycles. And a lot of my loading methods are far from traditional, with a lot of cluster sets, with a lot of volume for increased hypertrophy, working with higher intensity of 1 RM. Looking at the training split, how does that work within the actual overall rugby side of programs? And then looking at the needs-based all the time. As I said, this was taken from management. And the way I work it is, the fact is that in a quadrant 1 is that you haven't yet earned the right, and this is usually our academy players coming into our system for the first time, our first-year professional players, unless it's particularly great background for the player in discussing with it, they have no decision-making process within the overall team environment. So it's, I decide. So it's a dictatorial type of performance. I tell you what sets to do, what reps to do, we look at load charts and things like that, and basically this is what you're doing. As they progress through their training age, they develop into level 2, which is, we'll discuss things now, but the decision's still up to me. Again, if they stay with the program and develop, it's now level 3, where there's still discussion, interpretation, but now the athlete will decide what they're actually doing. And finally, for those people who've been around in the program, players have been in the program for an extended period of time, the decision-making process is on them. I act then as just a facilitator, someone to bounce ideas off, give some new information, and to fine-tune a few things if I see things heading towards an injurious situation. But it's the degrees of freedom, and training age develops that. Because a lot of these guys have got such a wealth of information and knowledge that they feed back in the program, assisting the program development. Indication is that we have 4 international players floating around Scotland or nearby that are all trained to be strength and conditioning coaches as I speak. So they can transition from their rugby playing career into a strength and conditioning career. So using that base of knowledge is extremely important. But even the 4th quadrant players are often your most experienced players. And having spoken to Richard McCaw many years ago, the great All Black captain, he said, I know you've put me in this quadrant 4 as a senior player who can dictate what I need to do myself, but I've got far too many things happening in my life. I'm the All Black captain, I have this, I'm doing flying lessons, I'm doing this, I'm trying to finish a university degree. You tell me what you want me to do. You're the strength and conditioning coach, I've got faith in you, this is up to you, this is on you, you do it. So it's interesting to note that a lot of them, even the more senior players, want to come back and just be told what to do. So if we look at pre-season, and as I said, this is what we're currently in place at the moment. This just gives you an indication of the overall pre-season protocols that we have in place training-wise at the moment. We work on a 2-on, 1-off weekend type program. You can see there's a big emphasis on skill development all the way through from the pre-season protocol. 4 strength training sessions a week, but this is the overall template. This is the generic template. So within that generic template, we will then break it down and say, well, we might bring you in on a Wednesday if you want to say a 3-session a week more towards power explosiveness rather than the 4-program a week size strength type protocol. So we'll bring you in, but we'll drop you out one of the other sessions. So even though it's sort of etched in stone there as the overall plan, it's not the plan for every single member of the squad. And I think this is where, I think yesterday or the day before, listening to people talk about the science versus the art. And if you've yet to read Ian Jeffrey's article in the United Kingdom Strength and Conditioning Association Journal, he has a wonderful application of that science and art practitioner relationship. And he talks about a Eulerian approach from the mathematician Euler. It says, well, we're going to study river flow, and this is the example he uses. So the Eulerian approach stands on the top of the river bank, or the top of the cliff, and looks at the river flowing underneath him, and looks at charts and tides and the erosion on the side of the river, and can get a good idea of what the river's doing. The other approach is what's referred to as the Langrenerian approach, and that person sits in a boat in the river and allows the flow of the water, and it gets more of a feel of what's going on in the river itself. And I'd like to challenge Ian and go one step further, and there's another level of practitioner who jumps out of the boat and swims in the river and really feels what the currents are doing and gets an overall feel. And this is the practitioner, this is the art side of the actual program. But working with the individual athlete to determine a program that is best for him and by extension best for the team involved as well. Some of you might have seen this that I recently published at Elite FTS. And it was so gratifying to get feedback from this particular approach that it was so simple and so usable, and we're going to use more and more of this as we go through in our training year. Irrespective of the phase of the year, it's just a simple flowchart based around answering questions as you go along. So first and foremost, is the player of the appropriate size for the position that he plays? When you consider that most international rugby players, the smallest, we have Fumiaki Tanaka from Japan, who's about 68 kilograms and plays the position of halfback. He could do with a little bit more upper body mass, so he may well be allocated a hypertrophy-based program. And those hypertrophy-based programs, if we cast our mind back to the previous slide looking at the course of the overall week, he could well be on 4 double-day weight training sessions, AM and PM weight training sessions, to achieve what we want to achieve out of that particular program. Pulled back on cardiovascular development programming, maintaining our speed, a little bit of power, but a lot more focus on that double-day weight training program. If the player can tick that box and say, yes, I'm the appropriate size, then we need to look at strength standards. So moving away from a hypertrophy program more into a strength program. And if we look at the target loadings that we've set, very similar across the world of sports, depending on whether it's trap bar deadlift all the way through to military press, with those particular standards, if they are not within 10%, I'd say, of those particular standards, then we need to really push more and more on the development of maximal strength, with some negotiation around different protocols. But if they're not near those particular numbers by around 10%, then we'll stay with the strength program until we actually get there. Now, if they are, we then will look at explosive strength decrement test. We'll look at the difference between their counter movement jump and their squat jump. Now, if those two numbers are relatively close together, we really think that they should do a lot more power work. So we'd actually look at the force velocity curve and then develop more speed strength, ballistic, plyometric type activities to get what we need to do from that particular player. If there's a large gap between those two areas, the explosive strength decrement, we need to start looking at increase in strength. Even though they may be close to their targets, they may just not be close to strong enough for what they need to do. So we may allocate them back into an overall strength program. So you can see, looking at the bottom section there, looking at the positions within the force velocity curve that we can actually start developing and training. And I think that's an area that personally I haven't done a lot of over the years, and it's only that the last couple of years since I've moved to Scotland that we're now looking at more and more of looking at, well, if they're strong enough, let's start looking at other factors. And there's another classic cases where players have been super, super strong, double body weight and a half squat, but they can't maintain their position in the front row in a scrum situation and get popped out of the scrum. So it's a technical issue. So rather than doing an additional strength program to try and take that particular player, who I think was a 273 kilo squatter, from a 273 to a 300, we'd be better off speaking to the scrum coach and allocating another technical session with a scrum coach, and or looking at his speed of engagement and looking at a more power-based program to actually develop the elements of his game which he needs. So in looking at that force velocity curve, again, very simplistic, looking at what constitutes different types of training along the force velocity curve, whether it's related more into sprinting, to ballistics, to plyometrics, to speed strength, more into strength speed, and then more into absolute strength, we can actually target along those curves and sure look at different snapshots of the type of programmings that we'd put in place to achieve the end goal for the particular athlete. Now that explosive strength decrement test is done every 6 weeks or so. So we can look at manipulations in the training programs when we're based around our one-on-one chats once every 4 weeks. With that information there and looking at our regular cardiovascular testing that we do, looking at their overall volume and loads from our GPS targets in training sessions, looking at how many games they've played and how many minutes for each game they've played, we can start saying, well, we maybe need to pull back on one variable and add some additional training in another area. So we can actually continually come back to that force velocity curve, tweak the program, get some variety in the program, but variety not for the sake of variety. Remember, we're training, we're not entertaining. We need to improve that element so that we're constantly on top of what the player needs to get the best out of his particular training program. If we look at a more neural snapshot, so those particular individuals that need to be concentrating more on the speed, ballistic player end of the force velocity curve, very much just a snapshot and very much just, again, for the purpose of this presentation, just a look at one training program that may have been put into place. Now, I've done a lot of work with what I call a speed-power combo, whereas they do a field-based warm-up for sprinting and then come in and do a ballistic exercise or a plyometric exercise. Then we go out and do some short accelerations and then come back and do power snatch from blocks. So we're looking at that faster component within the actual curve itself, then go back out again and do some more speed-related activities with more acceleration bases. Then come back in and do some cleans, and then go back out again, looking at neuro stimulus back and forth between the two activities, post-activation potentiation between the two areas, and then finishing off in the gym with the maximal strength area if that's a key area for development within that particular person's profile. But we will have, as I said, the holy grail of sports programming, we will have as close as possible to 40-odd programs happening at the one time. Staffing with 3 strength and conditioning coaches and 1 intern becomes a wee bit difficult at times, but that's what we have to overcome. And looking at how do we individualise this as much as possible to get the best out of the individual player. Now, in a strength training perspective, you'll see an emphasis change slightly. We still need to maintain an element of speed and power in the program. We don't disregard that. It's more a conjugate, concurrent style of programming in that we want to keep touching on those areas of speed and power because that's the nature of our game. If we completely negate them and just worry about strength, we then lose a key element of what we're trying to get out of the actual training program. But the emphasis then switches, so to probably 2/3 of the top end of the curve. So a lot more force development work, a lot more cluster sets as far as our training protocols are concerned. Use a lot of cluster sets in our strength training development, a lot of wave loading, which would be our 2 primary methods of choice for developing strength. On a 3-week rotating cycle with our working down from six repetitions down to 2 repetitions, and then looking at that as developing our next phase of training based on that. Then moving into cluster sets, even going into down to heavy doubles. So for example, 4 sets of 6 repetitions, but broken up into a double, 30 seconds recovery, another double, 30 seconds recovery, and a final double for that particular set. Had some exceptionally good development of that, particularly people coming from different programs that have just basically stuck to a more traditional approach to training, since like 4 sets of 6, then maybe 2 sets of 5, 3 sets of 3, and that particular scenario. And again, anything you see up there is available to download from what I have with me. Now, if you happen to fall into this hypertrophy protocol group, remember from that first flow chart, we put up the players that need to improve their overall mass, the double-day training program guys. And in most cases, we'll have double-day upper body and single-day lower body, particularly the volume of running that we're doing. But if we really need individual, we might pull them back from the running and double up on their lower body training as well. So this particular snapshot is the front squat, back squat, a complex. So setting up, and we'll take this down from 6s down to 3s over the period of 3 or 4 weeks. So looking at close to, for this particular example, 3 repetitions, front squat for 3 repetitions, immediately rack it, jump underneath it for a back squat, and then as many reps as possible for the back squat. You're looking probably to retain at least double what you can get in the front squat, but after reading a few other papers recently, taking it out to 15, even out to 20 repetitions. And then performing, in this particular scenario, looking at between 3 and 6 sets, depending on the individual. Then looking at variations in single leg activity, Romanian deadlift, slightly higher repetition, slightly greater volume, and then obviously incorporating some abdominal core particular movements as well. And again, just a snapshot, there are many, many different ways you can actually achieve this. And I'm sure I don't need to sit up here and talk to you about different methods, since you have thousands of methods at your availability. The other group that we spend a lot of time with is our metabolic group. And often our most metabolically challenged individuals are our tight forwards, our bigger guys, our 120 kilo plus linemen in your terminologies for American football. So we need to have them aerobically fit enough to get a 17 to an 18 on a yo-yo test, which is a good run. And that's what we need. Particularly if you looked at that clip of the rugby, we need them to be in support at various times. We can't afford to them just to scrummage and then to basically walk to the next breakdown and be ineffective at the next breakdown, or to spend that additional 1 second lying on the ground after making a tackle when they should be able to get to their feet into position and defend the next attack coming from wherever it is, either tight to the ruck or further out from the actual on the field. Remembering that it's a 70-metre wide field. It's 100 metres long and 70 metres wide, so there's a lot of real estate to cover when a team's playing side to side, length to length, as that video clip showed you. So we do a lot more beastly circuits, and from memory, I cannot remember who actually introduced that term. It was either someone from T-Nation or one of the great Martin Rooney or someone with working with Warriors, MMA type style of training program. But we find it very, very effective for our tight forwards in that we coordinate it with, as you see, there's 6 different options for a beastly circuit there. And I'm going to show you Ross Ford, international hooker for Scotland and Edinburgh, performing a beast circuit. It won't be the whole one, it'll just be the one time through, just so you can see an idea of what's actually achieved in this particular circuit.
If you're 5'5", then up. If you're 5'5", then up. This song is called the Heretic Anthem.
We might just downplay that music a wee bit. It's my assistant who put this together, having a little bit of license on it, but I'm sure we don't need Ozzy Osbourne coming in and blasting us out, but at least you're now all awake as well. So, this is 6 exercises, performed with 6 repetitions for each exercise, and then performing a high intensity metabolic exercise such as a watt bike. We'll set them 2 kilometres on a watt bike to ride as fast as they possibly can, or 750 metres on a row machine, or 750 metres on a ski erg, or 100 feet on a Versa climber, or at various times of the year they'll go out and do 3 minutes of a skill drill based around, say, a tackling or a clean-out drill, working on leg drive. And when they finish that particular metabolic activity, they'll come back into the beast circuit again and go through that again. And they'll go through this between 6 and 8 repetitions of the actual overall circuit. So we'll take around about 23 to 28 minutes to perform the actual task. And having a look at heart rate traces, we found that heart rate is in excess of 85% of max for the entire duration of that 30-minute block of metabolic training. Done with the tsunami bar in this particular instance, but can be done with a straight bar as well. We have done it with strength bags on the sideline as well, with 30 kilogram strength bags, performing those similar sort of movements, and then going into a skill-related activity, and then straight back to the sideline for another strength, or even doing a running activity as well. Sprint shuttles, variations on any activities around about 2 to 3 minutes in duration of high intensity running, and then coming back in. Now, recently we've just added the Strongman circuit on top of that as well. And the Strongman circuit allows us to look at some strength endurance type activities with our Strongman, as well as combining that with the beast circuit as well. So they did a beast circuit before this particular Strongman circuit, or you can use the Strongman as a standalone activity. Again, this is at our training facility at Murrayfield in Edinburgh, Scotland, and they're doing 4 particular exercises on this particular Strongman circuit, which is a weighted bear crawl, a prowler, a farmer's walk, and a tie flip device. We don't have a tie itself, but we actually have a tie flip device, which was a pretty cool thing to be able to get hold of. So keeping in mind they've actually just finished that beast circuit that you saw Ross Ford doing in the previous video, and now we're adding 4 times through this over about 15 metres on each particular activity, and then straight back in to the beast circuit once again. Now, if we're just doing it by itself as a metabolic conditioning type tool, we could find that we'll actually do it over 25 metres. Depending on the number of players I want to operate at the one time, we'd actually add a few of the different Strongman activities that we can get hold of, and then put them through probably either a 30-minute block and a similar sort of heart rate traces that we're getting. We're getting 30 minutes of high-intensity cardiovascular work at about 85% of maximum the entire time through. So what it's doing is conditioning players for the demands of the game, and the number of players who actually subjectively comment that it's very, very similar to how they feel at their worst possible moment in a half of rugby. As you can see, there's a wide variety of different activities we can actually utilise. Okay, and then obviously we throw some core work on the top of it. Not as an afterthought, but we tend to do more weighted core work, and we feel that these are our best go-to exercises. But again, the players have the license to come to us and discuss, well, this has worked for me in the past, can I throw this into my program? And again, it's a living document as far as all training is concerned. Now, if we go from that pre-season, which is what we're currently in now, and fortunate enough that my head coach has allowed me to get over here, and I have 2 very, very good assistants in Mark Keys and Jack Walsh to run the show in my absence. We then move into more rugby style of protocol, so much higher demands on the unit breakdown skills of the backs and the forwards, and also a lot more rugby content. Strength and conditioning pulls back a little bit. We're probably looking at initially, for the pre-season, probably 80% strength and conditioning, 20% rugby. In this particular secondary phase we're moving into, it's probably becoming more like a 50-50 split. And then we start getting ready for games, and it'll become more like a 20% strength and conditioning and an 80% aspect of rugby performance. As a former head coach of mine told me one particular year, is that in the pre-season, you get basically the whole loaf of bread. When we start more rugby, you get a slice or two, whatever I can afford to cut out for you. And then when the season starts, whatever crumbs fall off the table, you can have. And it worked out about 20% in most of the programs I've ever been to. Obviously, that's for the playing unit. If the non-players need to obviously pick up, because we have to get that 6 to 10 kilometres of high-intensity work within some positions an extra 1,000 metres of high-speed running for the particular game. If they're not playing, we've got to find methods within our training week to get that in place. And we try and front-load the week when we look at the in-season in a minute. And I think that's important in that once the team is selected, usually for us on a Monday or a Tuesday, depending on what our week plan is, we play a lot of Friday games, so we have usually a Friday to Friday protocol, and we tend to give players the weekend off quite a bit to spend with family. So once we've picked the team for the particular week, we try and front-load the non-players heavily in that. But having said that, some programs I've been in wait until the final day of the preparation. And I remember one classic episode with an All Black player who was not selected, and we needed to do some speed and power work with him. So we did a 45-minute speed and power circuit, and then we went back to the hotel and got ready to go to the game, and we had one of the players go down in the break in the warm-up. So he was immediately pulled into the team. The opening minute of the game, we lost another player in his position. So he was actually on the field after having done a 45-minute highly intense power program in that particular morning. He scored 3 tries and was named man of the match. And for the next 20-odd weeks, it was always, can we do that power circuit again on game day? I really, really got a lot out of it. And it was just through pure good fortune that we're able to survive it. And that's why we tend to start more front-end loading of the week rather than that back-end loading. You can see this is our normal week. Usually have the Wednesday off. This year we're going to bring into play more formalised recovery sessions on the Sunday if we play on a Friday night. We could play a 5-day turnaround, I think is the least amount of time we have to prepare the team. And in often case, we'll have a bye week, so we'll actually have a 10-day turnaround and often a 2.5-week turnaround between different competitions that players are coming into and going out of. So each one has their own individualised program based on, say, this template involved. But a standard one we look at in season is based around game day. So game day plus, game day minus. And again, depending on that degrees of freedom we give the players, they will be able to select. We're available all the time, so we're there ready to go. So they can pre-select what they particularly need to do. Hopefully we can actually move them away from wants and push them more into needs, which is hard in some particular cases. So looking at that, there's a wide range of different activities from metabolic circuits, depending on whether they're developed into a size group, strength group, speed group, metabolic group, 4 major groupings that we have throughout the entire year, and then we can actually select them saying, well, you're a wee bit metabolically challenged. And in your case, you're actually a plant because you produce oxygen, you don't consume it. So we really need to push you more and more into getting as many metabolic sessions as we possibly can without compromising your performance at the back end of the week. So strength and power, then a beast circuit or something like that, over the course of the actual training week. And you can see there's a wide variety we can choose from. Have been doing a lot more work with an INOL and Prolepin style programming, and this is based on looking at our fully recovered versus our non-recovered versus our midline group there. So depending on what the INOL we're trying to achieve, we can actually get that by doing different sets and reps, combinations, and different percentages of maximum. And we have a chart obviously set up for that as far as I know we're concerned with green, amber and red. So traffic light system looking at saying, right, okay, you are 100% good to go, fully recovered, we've done your welfare, your monitoring, we'll look at your loadings, right, we can actually get some gains out of this and we can actually work you hard. Secondary group, we need to keep ticking you over, but you're not ready to really push that envelope as far as making gains are concerned. So let's just pull you back a wee bit and just maintain the program. I hate the word maintain. I'd really like the word of increasing at a far decreased rate, because no one ever maintains. There's either some ebb and flow of the actual training program over the course of a season, particularly over 30-odd weeks of actually playing games. And finally, if you're not recovered but we still need to get you a workout, we'll hit you at a much lower percentage, basically just for almost a movement pattern. Rather than actually put loading on it, we'll look at 60%, but with movement pattern orientation, so we don't lose that particular movement skill over the course of a period of time if you're out for a couple of weeks. And that's the particular aspect we looked at week 1, week 2, week 3, utilising those 3 different traffic light approaches in season, throughout the entire season, then overlaying those particular needs based from the interviews with the players on what they feel they need to do, input from the coaching staff and saying, well, this player's having problems getting off the ground quickly, what do we need to do or what can we do? Okay, let's have a look at a couple of drills, let's trial this and then see how we go for the next 4 weeks. I like 4-week blocks so that we can actually put something in place, work it through and see if we've made a difference over that period of time. And then the performance is judged every week. And unfortunately it's either a W, a D or an L. And that's in the end how we're all judged. So hopefully you've seen over the course of that particular year variations, a lot of commonalities, but the way we achieve the different results based around individualized performance and improving the quality of the athlete will allow us to get what we need. Thanks very much.